The final institution in the game is the figure of John Law. Now what John Law does is read out a card every 6.5 minutes, which starts another turn. And those cards will contain news about the company and may also affect the institutions. Like for instance, they could make the discount rate go up and down, they could expand or contract the share offering, etc. But the point about the turns is, if you're in line at an institution, say you're waiting to receive your dividends at the bank, when another turn comes, you don't necessarily have to stop. You can stay in line and you can approach the teller when you get there. However, if the conditions change because the turn has changed while you're in line, those new conditions will apply. In other words, you cannot say to the teller, I've been in line since the last turn when the conditions were more favorable, so I want those more favorable conditions. The terms that apply at that moment when you reach the institution and transact with them are those you must deal with. Now the bank is the place that you can get loans. So for instance, if you want money to buy shares and you don't have enough money, you can go and you can take out a loan from the bank. You can borrow as much money as you want. The discount rate is sort of like an interest rate, but it's something you pay up front. So let's imagine that you're borrowing 100 libras and the discount rate is 10. You will incur a debt of 100 libras with the bank for that borrowing, but you will only receive 90 libras from the bank because the discount rate is 10%. Okay? So the discount rate can fluctuate in the game, and that basically therefore represents the price of money or the price of borrowing. The other thing that you can do at the bank, in addition to taking out loans and of course paying them off, is you can buy gold. Now, gold is represented by a piece of paper. You'll get a piece of paper that will say in the same value as the paper money, that is in libras, how much gold you have. You can buy gold with paper money and only with paper money. You can't use shares to buy gold. Now, the company is the institution that will pay out dividends on your shareholdings. So if a company announces that they will be paying a dividend of a certain amount on their shares, you will have to go to the company and they will have in their account book how many shares you have, and they will pay you dividends accordingly. But there is one thing to keep in mind here, and that's that although the normal way you'll be purchasing and selling shares in this game is through the bank, in theory, there's nothing to prevent you also from interacting directly with each other. That is, one team selling shares to another team without the middleman of a broker. If you do that, though, and say you buy shares from another team and you want to collect dividends on those shares, you must go to the company with a member of the other team from whom you bought the shares and register the sale. Otherwise, you will not be able to collect dividends on those shares. In fact, the other team from whom you bought them would continue to collect dividends. Now, the workshop is a place where you can also earn money. That is, the bank, you can get money by taking out a loan. But in the workshop, you can actually do work, so to speak, by answering questions. Remember, though, that there are two kinds of teams in this game, nobles and commoners. And there are a couple differences between them. But the biggest difference is that only commoner teams can work in the workshop. So in order to work in the workshop, you'll need two things. One, you'll need your badge for the workshop. And only the commoner teams have that badge. The other thing you'll need is at least one blue token. A blue token is something you have to present to the person working in the workshop before you answer a question. A blue token you can think of as like your payment for the right to answer a question. In order to answer a question, therefore, you must pass the blue token to the person working in the workshop. You will then receive a question on a card. You must answer that question. You cannot say, I don't want to answer this question. You cannot ask for another one. And you must answer the question immediately and without use of any outside resource. After you've answered a question, whether it's right or wrong, you must return the question without having made any physical mark on the question to the person working at the workshop. Now, even if you have more blue tokens, you cannot receive another question right away for another blue token. You must return to the back of the line and let other students answer questions with their blue token. Now, another feature of the workshop is that you'll have the opportunity to buy insurance. If you buy an insurance policy, that means that for all future questions you answer in the workshop, you'll receive at least half the money, not at least, exactly half the money that the question is worth, even if you answer incorrectly. But if you want to buy insurance, you can only do so after you've answered one question correctly. In other words, you can't just go and say, I want insurance. You have to get a question, answer it correctly, then you will be asked if you want to buy insurance. If so, you must do it right away. You can't come back in 2 turns and say, I answered a question correctly 2 turns ago, now I want to buy an insurance. No, in that case, you would have to ask for another question, and if you answered it correctly, then you would get another opportunity to buy insurance. So the first thing is that with the brokers, that's obviously where you're going to be buying and selling shares. That's probably the institution with which you're going to be interacting most in the game. So it's important to remember a couple of things. First, there are brokers dedicated to selling shares, that is from whom you will be buying the shares, and there are brokers dedicated to buying shares, that is from whom you, if you have shares, will be selling the shares. Each broker, there will be 4 of them in the game, will only do one of those functions. So if you want to sell shares, it's important that you go to a broker dedicated to that function. Brokers cannot do both functions. They will be labeled, so you will be able to see with a given broker, whether they are a buying broker or a selling broker. Those from whom you will buy shares. How does it work? What do you have to do? Well, the way it works is that there are a series of little mini auctions inside each turn. Each turn lasts a little bit more than 6 minutes. And every minute, according to a bell, the broker who is selling shares will release a tranche of shares. That means it could be 30 shares, it could be 40 shares, that they will offer at a given price. That means that you will start bidding on that tranche of shares if you want to buy them. But it's important to keep this in mind. This is absolutely key. The price that they will be shouting out will be the price per share, not the total price for the entire tranche of shares. So let's say the price is 10 and they're saying, do I hear 10? 10, and you say yes. But let's say that the tranche of shares is 10 shares. That means you're not bidding just for 10. You're bidding for 100 because 10 times 10 equals 100. So you have to make sure when you bid on the shares that you have enough money, not for one share, which they're announcing is the share price, but for all of the shares being released in that auction. Because if you win the auction, you are obligated to buy all of the shares that are being released for that little 1-minute auction. Okay? What happens if you win an auction and you don't have enough money? Well, you are still obligated to buy the shares. So what happens? You will have to register with the broker after completing your purchase of the shares that you bought them. You will receive the shares, but you will also incur a debt for the difference in the money you don't have. Let's say the total cost of the tranche is 900 and you only have 700. That means you've incurred a debt of 200. But the debt is not just 200. You pay a penalty of twice the amount. So in that case, you would have a penalty of 400 libras, which would go in your account as a debt against your total worth in the game. Another important thing also to remember when you are buying shares from a selling broker is that not only are you committed to buying the shares, that all of the shares that were released, you have to do so right away. In other words, if you don't have enough money, you can't just run to the bank and come back and purchase the shares. You have to buy them now. That means if you don't have the money, again, you incur a debt. Okay, so that covers basically the theme of selling brokers. But now let's move on to the buying brokers. That is the people who are going to accept your shares if you want to sell them. Now, you're buying the shares in tranches, that is, in groups of 30, 40, whatever. When you sell a share to a broker, you can sell any number of shares. So you don't have to sell them a whole tranche of shares, though you can. But let's say I have a tranche of 30 shares and I only want to sell 10 of them. Well, you can still go to the buying broker and say, I want to sell 10 shares, but I have this certificate for 30. They will then accept 10 shares from you, accept your thing that says 30 shares, and give you back another one that says 20 with the change. So remember that to a buying broker, you can sell any number of shares.